Okay, so this is going to be a brief video on inclusive language and implicit bias. So for your exercise this week, I asked you to define inclusive language and talk about it in a certain context. So I'm going to start by defining what I would say is inclusive language. It uses words that avoid bias. It avoids exclusionary language, so it doesn't exclude people. It aims for inclusion and understanding. And the understanding is important here because a lot of people, when they think inclusive language, they're like, oh, we're just trying not to offend anybody. But no, the actual goal is to get a better understanding so that everybody can conceive of what you're trying to convey. So I have an example. I'm going to talk about each of those things here in a minute, but I have an example I want to point out from the advertising world where you guys probably remember this. Kendall Jenner was in a Pepsi ad where it was like a Black Lives Matter protest, and she comes through with a can of Pepsi and gives it to the police officer, and all is well, and everybody's getting along. It pissed people off, and rightly so, right? I mean, this was really tone deaf. I've read a little bit about this advertisement, and they had a low budget, they had less time, they didn't use their usual agency, so there were some factors there, but a big factor is going to be who's looking at it, right? If you can have somebody in the process of this ad's creation look at it and say, that is going to be offensive, then you're better off. But if the only people you have looking at it are all coming from the same background, that may not happen. So in advertising, a lot of times we have these kind of tone-deaf ads. Dove has done a couple of them that I can think of, H&M, that are usually the result of not having enough diverse voices in the company. So when we talk about avoiding bias, we're talking about the kind of big picture stuff and the newer stuff. So we want to say things like flight attendant instead of stewardess. You guys know that one. We want to say wheelchair in a wheelchair, not wheelchair bound. That sounds horrible. And we want to use first person language. That's kind of a little bit newer. So a person with bipolar disorder rather than a bipolar person, because that bipolar person has a lot of other characteristics. An unhoused person rather than a homeless person, right? That homeless person has that negative connotation, homelessness being very negative. Unhoused, however, is a kind of a newer term. I've only really heard it in the last year or so. I don't know if you guys have or not, but that's, we're going to see if that sticks or not, but that's an alternative so that it's not so negative. Avoid bias based on race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, age, and religion. You're going to talk about this in your assignment this week as well. You're going to pick one of these. And I'll tell you, they're all pretty tough, to avoid bias in, but age is actually very difficult in terms of talking about people's age without sounding offensive. Inclusive language avoids exclusionary language. So if I'm talking to the class and I'm like, hey guys, we're going to do this, I am talking to men and women. There's no reason for me to call you guys, right? I've had students actually call me out on that one, so I'm trying to do a lot better with that. But we evolve, our understanding of these things evolve socially. Marital status is none of your business. I put that up there partially in a nod to, what was her name? Keisha Brown, who had her first and last name, but a lot of y'all thought she was married and you wanted to give her a Mrs. There's no Mr., no Mrs., no Miss, none of that. Just always first and last on first reference, and then last unless there's two people with the same last name. I will give you one more tip real quick on the marital status thing. If you're emailing a female professor and you don't know if she's a doctor and you're tempted to write Miss or Mrs. or Ms. or some combination, don't. Just write professor, okay? Or just go ahead and write doctor. They won't be upset if you say they're a doctor. It's just a kind of a small thing, but it's something that can make a difference. Pay attention to pronouns. So obviously, we've talked about the idea that people have preferences, and you should be able to, accommodate whatever their preference is in terms of their identity. So the AP says it's okay to use they as a singular pronoun instead of he or him or she or her. So for example, board member Reese Thomas said they would support the budget proposal. So in that case, you would probably have some prior knowledge of Reese Thomas and know that that's what they prefer. This is what I just mentioned. If you don't know how somebody wants to be referred to, just ask. That's the best way to do it on any level, on any aspect. Even when we get into the age issue, how do you like to be preferred or be referred to? Only include things like race and ability when it's relevant to the story. So obviously, if you're the first person to jump out of an airplane in a wheelchair, we're going to talk about your wheelchair, right? But that's been done, I hate to say. So it's not going to get any attention necessarily. Race is a similar kind of, there's usually, the first person to do something. Ketanji Brown Jackson was the first Black female Supreme Court justice. So obviously we wrote about those things when she was appointed. But when someone else comes along with those same attributes, they won't be the first. Okay, so I want to mention, we've been talking about inclusive language. Implicit bias is slightly different. It's kind of more of an idea of that we have it in us. Your other video talks about it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want to just bring up a few examples of things that a lot of times people believe or create our reality that is, what we learned growing up, what we learned from society or the media. So Black students are more likely than white students to be suspended for the same offense. It's actually 4 times more likely. So that the evidence there is there's some implicit bias. Asian students are expected to be better at math, right? Is that a bad thing to say? It is. It's bad anytime you stereotype a group of people, right? An overweight person is less likely to get a job than someone of average weight. And that's because we have a preference in our brain for how we think people should look, right? So there's all these ways in which bias kind of seeps into our understanding of the world around us. And it's helpful if you can find your bias. What I've got right here, Project Implicit, this is something that they did at Harvard. Let me show you guys. When you click on it, it's going to come up to Project Implicit, and you want that one that says Social Attitudes. You want to go to Take a Test, and then when you go down here, I wish to proceed. All right, you don't have to do this. This is not a required piece. And the link I just clicked on is in the folio for this module. But it's interesting, I think. And there's one for race here that I think is very relevant. But all kinds of different biases that we have. And it takes like an image of a person and associates it with a thing. And then you click things together basically. And it tells you kind of what your kind of subconscious reaction is to certain things, certain people, that sort of thing. So I've had students take this and get kind of pissed off, honestly, because they feel like they're not biased. And I've had students say it was really helpful, and then I've had students say it was not helpful at all. So I'm not going to tell you guys you have to go do this. But if you want to, I think you might find it interesting. All right, that's it for now.